And as folks are experimenting or embracing Kubernetes, do you also see that they are either making a mistake when you see the patterns, or is there you would suggest a right approach, a right way of embracing or adopting Kubernetes? What would that be?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So the adoption of Kubernetes is often, well, not always, but often a rather naive one. It starts somewhere at the lower levels of an organization, where individual departments somehow get hands on a Kubernetes cluster somehow, um, and they start to make their own experiments. If if you let that happen as an organization over time, you'll have different Kubernetes adoption in different departments, using Kubernetes in a different way, and also having emotional ties to using Kubernetes. I mean, that's similar for a lot of different technologies. And the drawback of that, just let that happen, is that if there's no policy, for example, around where the Kubernetes should come from, or what are the operational standards every team has to maintain to, uphold those operational efficiencies to avoid, generating a lot of cost or waste in terms of wasting people's time. If that is not there, then waste and increased cost is unavoidable, because you're looking then at complicated and complex integration projects where also you have to, it's not only the technology side then, but also those teams are getting attached, emotionally attached to their habits and their choices. So without guidance, these problems become problematic from both the technological as well as the human perspective. Therefore, especially after 5 years of experimenting, then consolidate, to the attempt to consolidate cloud platforms into a single strategy becomes, very conflict burdened projects that are hard to carry out. They are not, beyond, they are not impossible, but they are uncomfortable. So it's always good to have a kind of, centralized, um, at least governance around building application development platforms within a larger organization, with local autonomy to carry out experiments, but to feed back their learnings. It is, for example, very important that if there are deviations from a company-wide policy standard, that these deviations are to be argumented, and that there's reasoning behind it. So, for example, if you have a department that works with, let's say, Kubernetes clusters that run on machinery somewhere in a plant rather than a centralized data center, there the management of dependencies of applications, for example, the question where to run data services will be answered very differently from a centralized platform where there are already virtual machine-based data service automation running alongside Kubernetes clusters. There, for example, going with and using operators would be less of a, let's say, a preferred choice. It's not impossible then, but it's maybe not as motivated. You're not as motivated to do so. So those are the context-specific things you need to consider, and that's something where clients need to have experience on the CIO level and on the platform team level. But if these organizations are still experimenting, that knowledge isn't there, or it's still disconnected. So there's something happening on the top at the CIO level, and there's something happening at the engineering level, and they are disconnected for too long, and then you run into those integration problems and conflicts as well, because if those two layers meet at some point, that's when you do a lot of meetings. To get around this is to follow best practices in building application development platforms early on. That's our advice. It's not always possible, but it's saving a lot of time and money.